Busy here on Morning Live, and this last half hour will be no different. On Sunday, when President Cyril Ramaphosa declared COVID-19 a national disaster, he also stressed the importance of washing our hands to try and stem the spread of coronavirus. Now, the Water Research Commission says that while this remains a decent call, the question is, what impact is this pandemic going to have on our water resources in a country that is facing serious water scarcity where supply is concerned? How are people actually going to manage or have access to these hygiene standards? And to discuss this further, we're joined by Jessica Naidu, who's the executive chief officer, rather, I should say, of the Water Research Commission. Thanks for coming through this morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
So we hear we must wash our hands and do all these things which requires water, and very often, even at a time outside of battling the coronavirus, we forget as South Africans that we are a water scarce country.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to emphasize that water is critical in all phases of this, for the containment so that we don't spread the infection, but also equally around recovery and recuperation. It's going to be absolutely critical going forward. We're hopeful that, firstly, the announcements that have been made by government around accelerating access comes to fruition. There is, in fact, a command center now set up to accelerate access to water, and this will happen. And we are confident that, at least in our larger municipalities, our cities and towns, the water that is coming out of the tap is clean enough for you to disinfect yourself. It will work. It will work well. In fact, soap and water works extraordinarily well to deal with the virus. The issue about the people who don't have the access, we have to fall back on the traditional things. Whatever water people have access to, they are going to have to treat it. Classically, with beach, with boiling the water and those kinds of methodologies, not only for consumption anymore, but also for their daily washing. This is absolutely critical. Beyond that, we have to make sure that we get water to people.
How do we do that? Because, this call to accelerate access to water for people, how's that going to happen? Where's the water now suddenly going to come from?
It's not suddenly coming. It's part of an orchestrated effort that has been undergo for a while. The issue of the water tankers associated with the drought interventions are the kinds of interventions that are required still, now maybe at a higher level. In fact, we would like to encourage that the protocols change a little bit so they go to the centers that need the water first for their basic hygiene. So when schools reopen, those water tankers should stop at a school 3 times a day to make sure that the kids are safe. But beyond that, we have to accelerate our efforts around harnessing the groundwater, around the different infrastructure schemes. There is no substitute for it. You asked earlier about whether or not we can use something else other than water, that people were talking about using sand, for example. Incidentally, in the Islamic tradition, this is something that has been thought through around a substitute for cleaning oneself before going to prayer. And to some degree, it will work. But eventually, you'll have to have access to something that can wash off the viruses that you do, in fact, kill.
So what do people do? If you could just run us through the fact sheet that you've put together as the Water Research Commission.
Well, the important thing about the fact sheet, and we're going to have a newer version coming out this week that is much more summarized and much more graphic, so it is more accessible, is firstly to recognize what the symptoms are, to know what to look out for, and then to engage in the different activities yourself around keeping yourself well, and then keeping the people around you well, because this is also important. And the things that I've been talking about, the different measures you can take, are really important. But it's also to emphasize that there are certain groups that are much more vulnerable than others. For example, the people who deal with our waste on a daily basis are much more vulnerable to this virus than the rest of us. So the folk working in the wastewater treatment plants, for example, and there are specific measures that have to go around safeguarding those people. So it's about an awareness, a bit of an intervention, and places where you can get much more information around this.
So we know that this is going to test our already scarce water resources, but incidentally, this week is also National Water Week.
Yes.
And we cannot overemphasize the importance of, our water reserves and what we do with them. What's your message around that?
Look, the message is a simple one, that that there is something very interesting happening around this global pandemic, and we shouldn't lose sight of the opportunities associated with it. One of which is that globally and locally, on the President's statement, we should be accelerating people's access to safe water and sanitation. This is absolutely critical. The second is we have to take advantage of the world now once again reuniting in this great global project. So we are working with scientists all over the world in something called the Global Water Research Coalition. And then the third thing is that this changes the pattern of production and consumption in the world. And we should be taking advantage as South Africans, putting our best foot forward with the knowledge that we have to in fact start supplying other parts of the world with the products that are required.
And just a final question, there is some information doing the rounds that this coronavirus doesn't like water. Is there any truth to that?
If you're saying that water will help to get rid of the coronavirus, yes. It is not hydrophobic, however. It's the abrasive actions that you have and the breaking of the cells of the virus that actually work in killing them. But water is your safest bet to be clean and safe.
Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. Desigan Naidu, Chief Executive Officer at the Water Research Commission, talking to us about our water resources and, of course, also what needs to be done, what we can done, and you need to wash your hands, most importantly. And just a quick one, the 24-hour hotline, 0800 029 999. That's 0800 029 999. And you can also download the WhatsApp line. That's 0600 123 456. All right, with that, I'll hand you over to Lee.